Boardroom Bound, Episode 72, Creating Boardroom Value in New Ways with Lissa Broome.
Where can you add value? Why would you be a good board member? What kind of board? What industry? What are the things that you would contribute? And then start doing some deliberate research.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of Boardroom Bound. My name is Alexander Lowry, and this is the podcast dedicated to intentional leadership in the boardroom. My goal is to give aspiring existing directors the tips, tactics, and strategies necessary to transform your confidence and build a successful career as a board director. Quick reminder, you can get all of today's show notes at podcast.gordon.edu. And in today's episode, we're speaking with Lissa Broome. She is a professor at North Carolina where she heads the Director Diversity Initiative, which is simply about increasing gender, racial, and ethnic diversity on corporate boards. And she's going to share with us some of the key things that they do there. For example, they lead a training about earning a board seat. She's going to give us some of the insights that they teach to people. She's also going to talk about their diverse director candidacy registry that they have, which is free to join, available to any of our listeners if they would like to be considered for the board roles that come into them. Can't wait for you to hear what Lissa has to say. Let's jump into the show. Lissa Broome, welcome to the Boardroom Bound podcast.
Well, thank you, Alexander. I'm delighted to be here.
And I think it's just such a small world, right? So you're sitting in North Carolina, I'm up here in Boston. It's as if we're next to each other. And I'm excited to have you on the show today to talk about the subject that you guys are leading down there, which is doing a great job with more diversity in the boardroom. But your career didn't start that way, right? That's where you are now. Give us a sense of your career, where you started, because this is one of multiple hats that you wear, and we'll build up to it and we'll talk through it in more detail.
Okay, well, I'm a law school professor at the University of North Carolina School of Law, and I began that early in my career after a couple of years practicing law. I focus on banking law as my main area of expertise, and I also direct our Center for Banking and Finance. A few years back, I guess now around 2003, a couple of our law school alums came to our dean at the time and said they thought the law school needed to bring some leadership around the lack of diversity in corporate boards. And the dean called me in because I had been working on board diversity in the bank space and asked me if I would help with this. And so we agreed that, we ought to go forward with this, that diversity was important, and this was, around many lines, including race, ethnicity, and gender. So that's how I got started in the board space, and it has continued to be one of the things that I am passionate about and work a lot on going forward, along with all those other things, too.
And I think we can tie this together pretty well. So my prior role to being here as a professor of finance, I worked at J.P. Morgan. And J.P. Morgan, as all the big banks are, and I think rightfully so, is really beginning to think, how do we use our reputation, our muscle, our resources to help drive forward some different initiatives? And they were doing great stuff on just promoting women in their careers, on minority in their careers, all of these sorts of different topics. And what I've always found really fascinating is when you think about the boardroom, it is so obvious for all of us to see, let's call it progress, because the annual photo that's going to be in the report, you can see the breakdown by gender, by skin color, physical ability, perhaps in different ways like that. So you really get a very quick snapshot. If it's only 12 people, you can measure against it. So it almost feels like you can see progress happening. So I'm proud to be part of the steering committee of 2020 Women on Boards and the great work that they're doing. And I'd love your perspective on this, because I think we are making strides in the boardroom, and yet the C-suite behind it seems to be lagging so much more. You've probably seen in the time that you guys, since you first started the Director Diversity Initiative, that you're making advances. But how do you feel that translates, to the level right below it into the C-suite?
Well, that's a great observation, and obviously the C-suite is the hunting ground for potential directors, either people who are currently serving in those roles or recently retired from those roles. So one of the things our Director Diversity Initiative does is count board diversity of the 50 largest publicly traded companies in North Carolina. And we have been doing that every 3 years for the last number of years. And we've seen, as you noted, a steady increase in the percentage of female board members. For instance, in 2006, it was 11%. In 2018, it was 17%. So not a dramatic increase, but a steady increase. And for non-white board members, it increased in 2006 from 6% to 9.2% in 2018. But in recent years, we looked a little bit deeper when we were combing the proxy statements of those public companies and said, let's look at the named executive officers and see what that gender and racial and ethnic composition is. And so in our most recent survey from 2018, even though we had 17.4% of board members were female, only 9.5% of the named executive officers were female. Even though we had 9.2% non-white board members, only 6.6% of the named executive officers were non-white. So if that's the pipeline is not filling up very fast. So that's really an area of concern.
And it really is fascinating because if you go back, so we're both finance people. If we go back 20, 30 years, the way that the boards and the banks were filled were they wanted either sitting or retired CEOs, and then they expanded to sitting or retired CFOs. And it is slowly more from that. It was probably your buddies down from the country club that you knew, and part of that makes sense. You wanted people that you knew and that you trusted. Now, at some institutions, it might have been packed with more of your yes people. And we're expanding beyond that. And I would argue today, and I'd love that your opinion on this, it's sort of the wider C-suite is now the entire hunting ground. So it's opened up a bit more. Are you seeing that when you think about the director diversity pool of who they're drawing from?
Yes, I think that's right. So you can't confine yourself to the C-suite because of the numbers that I just recited. You're not going to fill all the board seats that you'd like to fill from that. And so, Heidrick and Struggles in their 2019 board monitor had a statistic that women were almost 40% of new board appointees, the highest percentage ever since they've been monitoring it, and I'm sure ever, of female appointees. And people of color were 23% of new board appointees, matching the same percentage in 2017. So obviously they are going different places, division presidents, other people with significant profit and loss responsibility. There used to be a fashion for academics and nonprofit leaders. There is still some of that in some industries, but I think they're really looking for specific expertise in some new areas like the digital areas, cybersecurity, and those sorts of things. Obviously, if you've got any expertise in that, you could walk on to many boards right now.
It's interesting. I talked to one of the partners who leads the board practice at Heidrick and Struggles, and he told me they have an absolute commitment that every board slate they put forward must be at a minimum 50% female. They really want to help push that envelope. And the reality is the slate of candidates are all going to be spot on spec. They're all going to be high quality. And it's very hard, I think, for anybody to argue we cannot find diverse of whatever type you want candidates these days. They're out there. And the idea that you had to be, say, the CEO doesn't make sense if you think about some of the huge multinational corporations, the size of the P&Ls that people could be running and could be the direct report down. To say they're not qualified never made sense to me anymore. And I think it's a wonderful thing that we're all starting to realize, yeah, those are people that are very well prepared. Plus, as you're the lawyer, I'd love your opinion on this. It used to be, if we went back 20, 30 years, you would be sitting on multiple boards. But now, in a world where there's a lot more litigation risk, the time demands are so high, your board probably won't let you. You can't do that as much, which is forcing the other opportunities of there's just a little bit more supply out there. Are you seeing that in the numbers that you're looking at?
With respect to lawyers not sitting on boards?
Well, I meant as a lawyer looking at something from the compliance perspective of we're not going to let our CEO sit on 5 boards anymore.
Oh, correct. Yes. So that is definitely the case. Many companies are limiting the number of seats, usually to 1 outside of their own company that a CEO would sit on a board of, just because of the time commitment is as well as the other risks that you alluded to. But I think probably most significantly because the time commitment that being on any significant board takes. It's 200 to 300 hours a year at a minimum, and then if something goes awry in that company or there's a leadership change or something like that, it can be significantly more. And it's not on your schedule, but it's on the company's schedule. So having a CEO that has sitting on multiple boards I don't think occurs much today.
Yeah, I saw a statistic recently that it would have been 2 pages if you'd gone back 20 years of CEOs that were sitting on 4 or more boards. And I think the list today was about 4 names. So just as a comparison between them. But you made a good point about the number of hours. Just think about the commitment of someone. I tend to just round it up to 300. And again, it might vary depending on your industry. If you're, say, M&A focused, there might be some intense periods in between. But we had a guest on our show, Cheryl Batchelder, who's been the CEO of several major corporations. And 2 of those happened because she was on the board and they had to make a CEO switch. And she came out of the board to fill in that C-suite role. So you have to know what you're signing up for. And even if you don't know that you're signing up for that, the ability, the possibility that that might be happening. And, you also do some, not just the registry of the companies and what they're tracking against, but you also do training. So I know you've got something coming up on May 21st about earning a board seat. So you're preparing people to get this. I'd love to hear a bit more about that and how you're helping the diverse candidates to be someone who's ready to seize that opportunity.
Yes. So annually since 2006, we've held a program called Broadening Corporate Board Diversity, Earning a Board Seat. And we pitch this to women and people of color who are interested in learning more about what sitting on a corporate board would be like. We have an application process, and we try to limit the audience to around 25 people so that we have some meaningful interaction between the audience and the panel members. And I will have 5 or 6 panelists who are experienced board members who have served on different kinds of boards, small companies, private companies, family-based companies, public companies, nonprofits, and so on. And we try to talk about what being on a board is like so that people can see if that's something that they want to aspire to. Decisions you might want to make in your career to put you in the best position to do corporate board service at some point in your career if that's something you're interested in. How you would go about looking for a board seat when you're ready, when you're at that stage, when you think you're ready to take that next step. How you position yourself in terms of your resume, your branding, and all of that. So it's a very quick introduction in a one-day period, but I think the participants get quite a lot out of it. And the other thing that we have is a database of potential board members. And so you don't have to go through the program to participate in the database. Anybody could register on it, but we're really, the database is designed for people of color and women. And so we have done this past year, or into the calendar year 2019, we did 10 searches at the request of different size companies, all the way from family companies up to 2 fairly large public companies who were looking to expand their board diversity. And we provided names and resumes from that database for those searches. And I've been trying to follow up with the 10. Of course, these things take time. So I do have one positive placement that I can report on a private company board, and some of the other searches are still in process at this point.
And I would love if you could talk a little bit more about that, because many of my audience members are always trying to think about what is the right way to network, how to get yourself out there. For example, many people know that they should be building stronger relationships. We talk about Heidrick and Struggles, but pick all of the big firms with the right headhunters who have that skill set, who have the awareness, who have the connections. And this is a great microcosm of that, right? And it's related but slightly different, but the same idea that someone would be coming to you looking for the right candidates to be filled. So let's pretend you're sort of like that headhunter seat and you're there doing an initial screening. How do you collect the right information? How do you figure out how to match up people at the right situation? I'm sure people would love that. It's an idea of like pulling back the curtain. What does it look like behind it?
Well, the company will describe what it is that they're looking for, and sometimes they have very, very specific specs, like somebody needs to have been already on a public company board, or somebody needs to be in the C-suite, or somebody needs to have this particular expertise or this particular industry experience. Sometimes they've even said, we want people within a particular age range that they're looking for. And so on the database that we maintain, there are database elements that are captured when you register, which include your race, ethnicity, age, where you live. So, for instance, bank boards, especially community bank boards, want people who reside in their footprint typically, so we can do it that way. So there are a whole number of factors, including industry expertise, functional experience, that we can search on. And so I'll run a number of different searches on those different factors that are important to that company, and then pull the resumes into a PDF. And then sometimes there might be an additional factor that our database didn't capture, but that might be reflected in the resume. And so, in a PDF document, you can do a search. So if you're searching for, cybersecurity or whatever, you can go through all the different variations of whether you hyphenate or not cybersecurity and search for that and find the people who've got that on their resume. Then look through the resumes and determine, who really has the depth of experience that I think the company is looking for, and, call out ones that don't seem, may have ticked some of the database elements but don't seem quite as relevant based on what I know the company's looking for.
And I think that some of the keys there are a company wants something specific. So some of our audience members are earlier in the process thinking, C-suite is next for me, board roles maybe after that. I'm planning and preparing. Being a generalist is not how you get a board. In the same way, being a generalist is probably not how you get in the C-suite. You're proving you have a platform of authority, you are an expert on a subject, and that's what's coming across in the resumes, for example, that are getting put forward. You talked about cyber before as an example of boards are increasingly looking for this critical role and skill set and insight between it and conveying who you are and getting that across succinctly. I imagine that's some of the material that someone would gather coming out of your training day in May of learning how do they best present themselves, right?
Yeah, that's correct. You really need to understand what is the value that you're going to add to a board and be able to articulate that not only in your resume or bio, but also in discussions that you have with your colleagues and people that you meet. We talked about networking, and you can be intentional about your networking. So if you, through this kind of self-discovery process, decide the kind of company where I could add the most value is, in financial services, but I'm a first-time board member, so I would, be unrealistic to shoot too high, so I need to shoot at this size company. Now, who do I know that is on a board of a company that is in that size and in the geographic area that would make sense for me to be on that board? And, really do some homework and find out, are there people that you know or people that you know who know that person, the 6 degrees of separation, who could advance your candidacy, express your interest, or help you get in front of the people that you want to get in front of to get advice. I have found the board members who come and participate in the program that we have are just so giving in terms of sitting down with people and helping them think about their board journey. Now, they can't do that with every person, but especially where they think they can add value or have a connection, that can really be beneficial to help think about what is your next step, who's the next person that you need to reach out to and maybe have coffee with or get advice on how do you further your board journey.
And I imagine a big part of it is also a cohort. And you were talking about there's probably about 25 students involved in the program. Do you have perhaps stories or experiences where these are groups that almost band together to help each other through the process as they go forward?
Yes, they do that. And, we've even had a nice event story that I can think of right now that comes front and center is a woman who was retired from her day job but had been extremely successful in it, who met a younger woman who was really just, at the beginning of her career, and they became mentor and mentee, and the older woman coached the younger woman into a more executive role in leading a major nonprofit in our state. And so that was, they kept a relationship on after the day that we spent together. And many of our panelists report to me that they have spent time with the attendees, after the event in coffee, conversation, email exchanges, or whatever, trying to help them figure out what the next step is for them. We also have on our website, ddi.law.unc.edu, a heading for successes, and you can see people who have been to our program over the years and who have subsequently achieved some kind of board seat, whether it's a public company or a smaller company. So we try to keep track of the people that we have helped in some way or another, and so people can see their path, and that sometimes can be inspiring to see what okay, well, somebody else attended this program in 2016, and in 2018, look what happened. Maybe I need to reach out to that person and ask them how they made that leap.
Absolutely. And we're all after guidance and insights and best practices, which is, I'm sure, why many people are listening to this podcast now. But a mentor relationship is important. And of course, sponsorship is even more so. Someone who's going to put you forward for the boardroom. And I imagine some people who are coming to this program are in a really good place, and people are seeing that they're interacting with. You talked about the 5 or 6 panelists able to spot talent. But we also recognize that there are some sort of specialist type situations. And you were sharing with me that there's also another training that you're doing in April related just to family businesses. I'd love if you could share with us about that as well.
Yes. Well, based on this program that we do every year in May, one of the panelists on that program last year was a woman who works with the Family Enterprise Center at the Keenan Flagler Business School, which is at University of North Carolina campus as well. And she said, I really liked your program, and I think we should partner together to do a program that we're now calling Creating an Effective Family Business Board. And that will be the afternoon and evening of April 16th, 2020, and most of the day on April 17th, 2020, here in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. So that will be focused on existing family business board members coming together to talk about their board situation, but I think it would also be appropriate for folks who are maybe trying to enter into board service through a private company board, which might be a family company that is now looking to add independent board members. And Amelia Rinkert-Thomas is the liaison there, the woman who had participated in our program who set this all up. And she's been a great source for us of clients that she's been working with, family businesses who are interested in adding independent board members. And we've worked with her on 2 or 3 searches, one of which was a successful search, at least. And I'm sure the others, hopefully, I'm keeping my fingers crossed, will turn out to be successes as well.
I think the reality is it becomes a very small world at the end of the day, and people are looking to make those connections because it's surprising sometimes you haven't been in the boardroom just how personal it is. Let's say you have a dozen people around the room making really important decisions in a short period of time, and you're not together very often. So you want to make sure it's a fit. So those recommendations that someone has of a strong candidate goes a long way. It's probably really exciting also to be building out a brand new program based on the success that you've seen of the other one. So, with that said, I imagine the future is going to continue to change and grow and develop. So your Director of Diversity Initiative, I know initially started as North Carolina, but it sounds like it's growing beyond the state, right?
Yes, I mean, we get search requests from companies around the country, and we have people registered in our database that come from around the world. So, I think we do have a national footprint. We're focused, obviously, in North Carolina because that's where most of the people that come to our programs are from, and most of the people who know about us are from. But thank you for this opportunity to spread the word far and wide about what we do. So hopefully we can attract even more people from around the country and the world.
Well, especially if your system actually has people from around the world, that is a magical fit. And it is an opportunity for people probably just to learn what some of these are like. So we talked about headhunters earlier in the show. The idea that hopefully you'd find the right executive recruiter for you can actually get to the one who should be on your radar. And generally the idea is they will take the information you submit and it will go into a database. And there's some keywords, just like you're talking about. They're able to do a searches pulled up for the right time, for the right situation. And it sounds like this one is someone people can wrap their head around it because it's sort of smaller and growing at this point. But it's the same sort of idea of you are a hub of connectivity for people to come and searches. And it would be very helpful for my audience if you could sort of paint the picture, because you've been talking to the organizations looking to fill a board role. I imagine you might have lots of different scenarios from companies that are perhaps wanting to grow and expand, so need a new skill set, to someone maybe there's a retirement they're looking to replace, or they're just recognizing maybe we're pale, male, and stale and we need some diversity. Perhaps help us understand the types of conversations you're having with companies that are looking to fill board roles.
Well, before I get into that, let me mention one other thing. We work closely with executive recruiters and with the NACD Director Registry. Sometimes reaches out to us when they're looking to, again, broaden the pool. So that's another way when you kind of focus on one executive search firm, they may not get the search request for a whole wide variety of places. So what we're trying to do is to be a source for everybody to come to, including other recruiters, if they're trying to expand their pool, especially around diversity areas. And then your question was, remind me again.
Yeah, so the question was sort of explaining the mindset of perhaps a typical conversation of someone's coming to you and saying, we're looking for candidates to fill our board role, what that's like, what they're looking to do, how that sort of begins before it ends up with here's a spec that we need to go fill.
Well, some have thought it through very carefully and will be presenting, here's the spec, especially when it comes through a executive search firm or the NACD director registry, and it's already specced out, and you're just hoping that you can find some folks that might be good to add to the pool of candidates that they probably have already identified through their other sources. Some are much less specced out, especially with some of these smaller companies, and part of the process is asking them some of the specific questions, like, just telling me that you're interested in female candidates is not going to limit the pool very much, so we need to talk about, is there a geographic preference? I was working with a company that was in the Midwest, and so that was, do you want people that are from the Midwest, or would you take people from North Carolina or somewhere else? So asking those questions, are you interested in age diversity, and if so, on your board, what does that look like? So some boards might be heavy at the old end or heavy at the young end and be looking to add the other. So you need to find out what that existing composition is. And, of course, most of the companies already have this sense of the matrix of skills that they think they need to fulfill their strategic mission and vision going forward, and have plugged in their existing directors and maybe their potential retirement dates into that matrix to determine where are they lacking expertise, and or where are holes going to open in the next year or two. And this is such a long-term process. Some of these searches can take a couple of years from beginning to end. So you really need to, if you're a company, start thinking strategically about what kinds of skill sets do you want and when are you going to need them, because it takes a while to fill those, to find the right people, to talk to them, to make sure even if they spec out perfectly, like you said, they may not fit. So you need to meet them and talk to them and understand that as well.
And I know for a lot of our audience, they're always trying to think about what is the right way to begin to position myself. And I think a big part of that is, you're building your brand, your position of authority, of course, getting all the right document in place from your bio to your board resume. But the networking is an essential part. And Lissa, it seems like you're having great fun because you get to talk to both sides here. You're talking to candidates and potential candidates, and you're talking to companies looking to fill the board roles. And when you're talking to both those two different camps, and maybe this comes together in a training when you're filling that also with the seasoned professionals, if you look at that and sort of summarize it up like, wow, this is the best advice that I wish I could have known to share people with early on. This is sort of the best practice that I'd love to raise the visibility of. What are some of those key things that you think our audience should be aware of from all the stuff that you're doing?
Well, from the company's perspective, I would say when you're looking for a new board member, to look broadly, and if you engage an executive search firm, talk with them about how they might use other resources that are available on our Director Diversity Initiative website. We have a list of a whole bunch of other programs that are focused on diverse directors of various types of diversity. And so there are lots of organizations out there like ours, some of which are a lot bigger and have perhaps greater reach, that do the same thing that we do and have the same kind of registry. So there are lots of free or near free resources out there that companies could be taking advantage of on their own or through whatever recruiting service that they're using to help them. So find those resources. We've got a lot of them cataloged if you're interested in the diversity aspect of it. NACD is another resource to help with director placement and so on, and use them. So that's from the company perspective. From the person perspective, I think it is really having that hard conversation with yourself about where can you add value. Why would you be a good board member? What kind of board? What industry? What are the things that you would contribute, and then start doing some deliberate research. There is a website, www.secinfo.com, and at least last time I signed on to it, it was free. They keep threatening to start charging for it, but it has all of the SEC proxy statements on it, which you can get other ways as well. But the thing that I like about it is I could type in your name, Alexander Lowry, and it would tell me what board you were on. So I could, if I'm getting ready to go meet with you and I want to find out more about you, that's the way I can determine, Alexander's on the board of Bank X. He would be a great person to help me understand more about either that bank's board or how to get into financial services or whatever it is. So that's a good resource that I would recommend folks take a look at as well. But be deliberate, be intentional about your skills, your strengths, your contributions, and have a plan.
Well, I love that. That is a great resource. I did not know about that website, so delighted to share that with everybody. We'll make sure we link to that in the show notes. Lissa, we were delighted to have you on the show today. Thank you for sharing your insights and helping all of our audience to be boardroom bound.
Well, thank you, Alexander. It was truly a pleasure. I appreciate all you've done through your podcast to help advance the cause of women and people of color in the boardroom. That's it for this episode of Boardroom Bound. Now remember to head over to podcast.gordon.edu where you get links to all of today's resources. And please know that the Boardroom Bound team and I are so proud to be your go-to podcast for all things that connect, prepare, and empower you to land a board seat. Be sure to subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss any of the high-quality content we're bringing to you every Wednesday. And thanks for joining me today. I can't wait to share more stories and strategies from brilliant business minds with you again next week. Remember to keep tuning in to be Boardroom Bound.